I would love to um, introduce him, but I believe most of us for the past, I think, for some months now, we've been um, going through this webinar. He's been teaching us, building us up, getting us ready, giving us the right information, the information that you should know as a data analyst, or anyone pursuing or trying to gain value out of data. We've been learning a lot today too. We have yet another educative session. Guys, there is one thing I want to say. Go to LinkedIn. Those of us that are using LinkedIn Premium, get enrolled in one of his courses. I kind of uh, did is it data science in banking, finance, and economics. Yeah, I actually did that. It was such a great uh, opportunity to go through that learnings and all that. So, guys, again, let's welcome Dr. Paulson. Dr. Paulson, welcome again. The floor is all yours. You can take it. You can take it from here, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here once again. I know this is the third time for a quarterly webinar, and I am here hoping to give you some information about building your portfolio, about getting employed. And I'm going to start with some of the same qualifications that I've had before. Your people at Blossom, your instructors at Blossom are going to be by far the best source for information about the job opportunities available to those of you who are in Ghana and looking for other ways of building on it. My own experience is I'm a psychology professor, but has worked in the data world for, 30 years. I I teach statistics, and as was mentioned, I make um, video courses on a range of data science topics for LinkedIn Learning. And if you have access to LinkedIn Learning, hopefully you could go there and find something that would be useful, as well as the other courses that are available there. Now, just by way of introduction, I've been here before, but I'm Bart Polson, and I am in the United States. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. That's in the west by the Rocky Mountains. And I teach people how to work with data. And the most important thing that I have found, and I have a presentation, I'm going to go over that. The most important thing that I have found is that in addition to your technical skills, you must have the technical skills to be able to do this. Although AI has changed the exact nature of the technical skills dramatically. But in addition to that, it's being able to operate insightfully within the professional context that you're consulting in, understanding the needs of your clients and stakeholders, and being able to address their concerns, their issues, and telling them what they need to do as a result of it. That's going to be enormously important. And I'm going to talk a certain amount about that today. And so what I am going to do is I am going to attempt to share my screen. Give me one moment. This is always a little iffy for me. Okay, I am going to, there we go. I'm going to share that screen, and I will press play on my slideshow. All right, so let's see here. Can you see my presentation? I just need to know if that's visible to you. Okay, great, thank you. All right, let me talk about this. The given title is Building Your Portfolio in the Job Market as a Data Analyst. And I appreciate this for a few reasons. Number one is I do come from the data analyst side of things as opposed to the machine learning engineer kind of thing. So I have a background in psychology where we do statistical analysis as a way of supporting our research and our goals. It's a different thing from being a machine learning engineer, which of course is a huge growth area and is very important. but my own experience has a lot more to do with data analysis, and especially for advising human decision makers. And I say that because if you're a machine learning engineer, you're often developing a data product that is going to be implemented automatically. And that's different as opposed to advising a person who's going to use your analysis to make decisions in their own context. Now, I also like to think of this as how can you show your value? That's going to be the most important thing for you to do. You're going to have technical ability, but you got to do some things beyond that. So let me show you this. The most important thing is if you're building your portfolio is you don't want to be just another interchangeable robot typing interchangeable code. The ability to clean a data set, the ability to run an algorithm, again, those are important. They are necessary conditions for success in your work, but they are far from sufficient. You need a lot more than that because a lot of people can do those things. And truthfully, even right now, the bots can do a lot of it. And so you need something more than that. And basically, I want to say, where is your value? And because your value is what you want to show in your portfolio and make it abundantly clear to people, this is what I bring. Now, I make a contrast. AI sees data, okay? And it only sees the data that's in front of it. On the other hand, you as a human see meaning. Here's a poem. I am like a fish in love with a bird, wishing I could fly. And as a person, that means something to you that it may not mean to the AI. In fact, it brings in a whole set of associations and it inspires you to say other things and to build on it in a way that the data alone is not sufficient. Again, I want to make it clear. The data is important. The data is what we're working with, and you need the algorithms. You need to know how to work with them. But your value is going to be in bringing the meaning. That's your added value, what distinguishes you. So where is the meaning that you can bring into things? I'm going to give you some sample questions, and I'll go through each of these in more detail. For instance, where did the data come from? How old is it? Who was sampled? Was it something that you created or did it come from somewhere else? How were things measured? And this is going to make an enormous difference in how you establish meaning. How did the people interpret the questions? So for instance, I've done surveys where it turned out that people were interpreting the questions on the survey in a dramatically different way than I would have expected them to. And that changes the way that you bring value to your data. What does the algorithm tell you exactly? And you're going to find out that there are times when there's a very big gap between what the algorithm actually does and what you want it to do. And then what can explain the pattern? And this is one of the biggest, this gets into the difference between correlation and causation. I'll have more to say about that. And then finally, what can you do about it? Specifically, what actionable insights can you give to your clients or stakeholders as a result? And if you can answer these questions about the data in your project and about your analyses, and if you can highlight the ways that you use these to bring value to your analysis, that's going to make a huge addition to your portfolio as an analyst. It's going to show them that you can bring the human value above and beyond your technical ability. And that's above and beyond what the AI can do on its own. So let's go over each of these questions. Where did the data come from? Is it a survey? Is it an experiment? Is it archival data? Is it data scraped from a website? And I'll tell you right now, I've got a picture here of a phone customer satisfaction survey where people are rating things on a 5-star system. That's super common. But it's important to know that if your data comes from people who were willing to fill out a satisfaction survey, even if it's just 5 questions, I don't always do it. And then B, 5 stars for your satisfaction. Satisfaction is a very big thing. a lot of things go into it, and to get it down to a single linear measurement, it simplifies it and it makes your analysis easier, but it does lose a lot of the meaning inside that. And so hopefully, if you know that your data comes primarily from these little star ratings that people gave on their phone after they made a purchase, then that is going to be a really important part of the context that you need for making sense of your own data. So, where did the data come from? And again, is it data that's original to you and your project, or is it data that came from somewhere else? Is it from people with smartphones? Is it from people who only made actual purchases, or can other people get in there and make things? I know, for instance, that I'm a university professor. And so there's a website called ratemyprofessors.com where people can go on and they can rate the professors. You don't have to have actually taken the class. Anybody can go on there and take it. They can say they took the class, but I've seen evaluations by people who I know did not take the class. And so that's going to make a big difference. And obviously, when it comes to 5-star ratings, one of the major challenges is going to be separating out automated bot spam and people who are paid to go and create thousands of reviews. And there are times when those might constitute the majority of the reviews. And so you're going to have to know that, and whether there's some sort of quality control on the data. That's going to make a big difference in how you get the meaning out of the data, because you're going to have to separate out the parts that are not meaningful or that tell you that, knowing, for instance, that the majority of evaluations on something were bots or spam, well, that tells you something too. And it's going to be important in terms of how you help your client act on the data. Okay, the second question, how are things measured? It's like, again, a 1 to 5 scale. That does tell you something, but it's a dramatic simplification of what's going on. Try to measure something like learning or a person's ability. Most of you are involved in actively learning new skills, and you want to check that you learn them, but you know that there's more than one way to do it. So a person might be able to pick the correct answer on a question. If the answer is there, they can choose the right one. That's called recognition. That's different from recall, where a person has to write something into a blank. And it's different from calculating something on your own, which is different from conducting a whole project from start to finish. And so how are we measuring ability? All of these different levels are important, but they tell you different things. And you're going to need to know, for instance, was this person using say, for instance, you're developing your machine learning skills, your data science skills. And if you're using a well-known data set, like the Titanic data set or the Iris data set, which are fabulous for examples, and I use them for teaching. They're great for teaching and they're great for experimenting, but it's not something that you would want to put into your portfolio because they've been done. I'm sure they've been analyzed over 1 million times by 1 million different people, and you want to be able to bring something else into it. But also, when it comes to measurement, I'll tell you one really big one is, are you dealing with close-ended measurement? So are you actually, taking out a tape measure and measuring something? Or are you dealing with open-ended text? And in customer satisfaction, that's going to make a very big difference between the 1 to 5 star reviews, which are very easy to model. That's a great one. You just build a regression and you're good to go. But you can probably get a lot more value by looking at the actual comments that people leave, and also a lot more value by looking at their interaction history with the platform, and maybe looking at their other evaluations and their other comments. That analyzing open text, like comments on social media or comments on a e-commerce platform, that's that can be very complicated. There are established libraries for getting a sentiment analysis designed to make it as easy as possible. But again, how are they deciding what is counts as positive or negative, and what do they do with ambiguous ones, or people who have both positive and negative things to say? It's challenging. And so it's helpful to know how things were measured. And again, if you're doing machine learning, you're going to be relying to a large extent on other people's libraries and other people's packages of code. And you need to know how those things work. I know, for instance, that when people use existing libraries to do facial recognition, they unknowingly import a whole range of limitations and biases that come along with that particular package. The same thing goes true with voice recognition. And then you can get to something very serious with real repercussions, like health and medical decisions that were only measured in a very simple way on a restricted set of people. And so you do need to know exactly how things were measured in the data set, how they got there, because that's going to help you put them into context to interpret them and get the value for your client. Okay, the next one, how did people interpret it? And the reason I'm showing this to you is because 1 week ago, I was in southern Utah in the desert, and I was doing a bicycle race. That's not me, but it looked like this. And I just learned a term that is Dutch, klimvarken, which literally means climbing pig, which does not sound like a compliment, but it is a compliment. I rode a single speed gravel bike, and I could not keep up with people on level ground. But I passed maybe 20 people while climbing hills. One of the tricks with single speed is you can't gear down, so you just have to go as fast as you can up the hill. I was a superstar on the hills. And so because this was the Belgian waffle race, and they do speak Dutch in Belgium, among other languages, the klimvarken, the climbing pig, was in fact a compliment. But when people are looking at a survey, do they know what it means? So, for instance, look, let's say at the very, very least, I have seen evaluations on e-commerce sites where the evaluation, the comments made it clear that they were not based on the product. They were based on the customer service of the e-commerce company. That's a different thing. It's just they don't have a separate place where they can rate that. So maybe they got really grumpy with the e-commerce people, so they give it 2 stars, even though the product itself was good. Or they say it took longer than I expected. That doesn't change the quality of the product. It does change the overall experience for the person, but since they gave just a single thing, when they talk about satisfaction, you don't know how they're interpreting that whole thing. I have had other ones. I've talked about this last time here. It actually becomes an issue of, it's funny things like defining the number of people in a family. People actually define that differently. So, for instance, I know that here in the United States, there have been politicians who have suggested that only biological children count. My 3 children are adopted. We adopted them at birth or at 6 months old. They've been with us their whole lives. We've raised them. But to some people, that doesn't count as family. It counts to us. I know other people who have counted children who were stillborn. I know some who counted an ectopic pregnancy, which never got beyond fertilization, really. I know some who count people who have lived with them for extended periods of times without ever having a formal relationship. And so it does become important to know, how do you define this? We're in the World Cup right now. and we had the Olympics not long ago. But anyhow, there's an important question about how you define what country a person is from, because the World Cup and the Olympics both let people define their connection to a country in many different ways. They don't have to have been born there. In fact, they may not even live there or have ever lived there. But sometimes, I know with the Olympics, if you have a grandparent who is from a country, then you can theoretically represent that country. And the World Cup, I saw a statistic on a meaningful percentage of players who functionally did not live in the country that they're playing for. But they do have a connection. And so it's important to know, how do people define these things? And you're going to need to probably do some qualitative follow-up with at least some of the participants to see whether they are interpreting things the way you expected them to, or to see what the variation of interpretation is, because that's going to affect the way you extract meaning from your analysis. Okay, what does the algorithm tell you? The reason I'm showing you x-rays here is I know people who have been misdiagnosed on the basis of an x-ray, actually a mammogram, and they were told that they had breast cancer. And then what happened is, a week later, when they got the results of a biopsy, so they did the mammogram, they said, you have something in there that looks like a tumor, we think it's cancer. But they also did a needle biopsy. They got a little sample of the place in question. They sent it off to the lab, and it took a week to get back the results. And they go like, oh, wait, sorry, it's not cancer. It's just fibrous tissue. But on an x-ray, it looks like cancer. And that's a huge problem with that one. I'm just going to put this to sleep for right now. So in a medical diagnosis, it's possible to get a misdiagnosis that, this way of reading an x-ray doesn't always produce what you want. In the data world, by the way, that's more of a measurement question, but in the data world, it's important to know what the algorithm tells you. So I'll tell you, for instance, if you do A/B testing, and that is where you, for instance, have a website, and you have two variations on a website, like you got a call to action button that's high and it's in red, or you got one that they got to scroll down to. And you have these two variations, variation A, variation B. And when people come to the website, they randomly get one version of the web page loaded or the other. And what you're doing is you're looking for the change in response. How long are they on the page? Do they actually click the button? Do they take the call to action? Now, with a call to action, this is pretty simple because it's usually yes, no. And so you just want, did they click it? Did they not? And so that's not so difficult. But there are times when you're looking at something like the time on the website. If you look at YouTube analytics, you're going to see the average time on a video. And it's measured in seconds, because most people come to the video and they very quickly, they decide to go to something else. If you're doing A/B testing with a quantitative outcome like time on a video, what you are usually using is a t-test, which compares the means of two different groups. And you can find out whether there is a statistically significant difference between those two groups. But what you are comparing is the mean. That's the average. And that average may not be the thing that you're interested in, especially when you look at something like the amount of time on videos is dramatically skewed. Most of the views are going to be very close to 0 seconds. And then they're going to come out and then they'll taper off to just a small number of people who watch the entire video. I have some videos on YouTube that are 6 hours long. Very few people make it through the whole thing. But they're there for a reason. And in those situations, maybe you don't want to compare the mean. That's just a single thing. Maybe you want to compare the median, or maybe you want to compare the somehow compare the entire middle 80% from the 10th percentile to the 90th percentile, and you want to compare those, and you can do quantile regression in those cases. But there are many different ways of looking at. But remember, if you're doing a t-test in an A/B experiment, what the algorithm is telling you is whether the means are statistically different from each other. That's different from saying that the groups are different from each other, because again, it has to do with the shape of the distribution. Also, I have done experiments where the mean was not different between the two groups, but the standard deviation was that one group was more spread out than another. To give you an example of this, this is not experimental data, but at least in the United States, the data that I've seen in the past on education that is comparing standardized scores on mathematics for male students and female students. Okay, so men and women math scores. And there are two things that have been pretty consistent. And that is, first, as a group, there is a small but statistically significant difference where male test takers tend to get higher scores as an average than female test takers. So that's comparing the mean of the two groups. And there's a difference between the means. On the other hand, there's enormous amounts of overlap between the two groups. I mean, there's huge amounts of overlap. And but the other thing that's interesting is that the distribution for male test takers is more spread out. So what that means is you're going to get a larger percentage of male test takers with perfect scores than female test takers. I don't know what the actual difference is, but you're also going to get a larger percentage of male test takers with extremely low scores in the like cognitive disability range. So the male scores are more spread out, and that is at least as interesting of a story as the very small difference in averages. And so you would have to do a different test. You'd have to do something, again, like quantile regression, or you would specifically look at what percentage of scores are above the 95th percent value or below the 5%, and you could do that. But remember, the algorithm sometimes tells you something different from what you're looking at. And means are an extremely common thing in a huge number of places. Linear regression is based on means and variances. Many categorization algorithms will use the same thing if you have a quantitative outcome. And so you need to be mindful of what it's actually telling you there. Okay, what can explain the pattern? Really, this is causation and correlation. And the reason I'm showing you this particular photo is I believe that this is a straight ahead photograph that has not been doctored in any way. They are shooting the photo through a piece of glass that has been cut in a particular way to give it these vertical stripes, and it's rounded a little bit. So they're shooting through I can't remember what the name for it is, but they're shooting through the piece of glass. And then they have, I believe, just some dramatic lighting on the person and on the wall. I was at an arts festival yesterday, and there was a photographer there who they had to have a disclaimer to say all of our photos here are straight photos that are not doctored. But they did a lot of dramatic lighting effects and time-lapse effects. I think this is a straight up photo. And on the other hand, if you wanted to, you could create something like this in Photoshop pretty easily. Wouldn't it be hard? Why are you seeing what you're seeing is the single most important question that you can answer for people. Why did you get these results? What explains the patterns that you found in the results? That is the most important thing that you can show in your portfolio, that you considered several possible explanations for the results, and that you were able to narrow it down to this is the most likely. These ones we know for sure they didn't work. Let me give you an example. I remember seeing, and I may have mentioned this before, but I remember seeing a billboard for a private elementary school that was here in Utah. The public schools here are just fine. It is unusual for people to send their children to a private elementary school. Other parts of the United States and other countries, private schools will be more common, but public schools are fine here. But there's this school. You could send your kids to that one. And the billboard had 3 or 4 kids wearing their school uniform and looking very clean and happy. And then one of them is throwing an apple in the air because apples and education. And then it said, learning like this only comes from, and then it said the name of the school. And we're like, I know absolutely nothing about what the learning is. I know that you were able to show me a photo of 4 kids, or at least they appear to be kids, who may or may not actually go to your school, and they are happy. I have no idea about their learning. But more to the point, let's just assume that the test scores for this school are in fact higher than the test scores for similar grades in public schools. Let's just take that as a given. They're higher. Is it because it's a better school? I can argue that statistically, that school could actually be making things worse for the kids. If the kids come in with a substantial advantage, now they're going to a private school that costs money. And so they're going to be coming from families that have more money than I have to send their kids there. And because there is an association between income and test scores, which is separate from the association with intellectual ability, you can imagine a situation where kids who come from these families would have like a 10-point advantage just because of the things that their family's money makes available to them. But they, on the whole, come out with an 8-point advantage. So you can actually say that the school is actually doing them a disservice of 2 points. Now, I'm making this up, but it is entirely possible. I know so many other things. I know almost every single time I see a social media post or a news article that talks about health and says, this is good for you, this is bad for you. My wife is sick of hearing me say, was that an experiment or was that a correlational study? Because most of the time it's going to be a correlational study. And they say, people from this country live longer. I say, well, maybe there's things that don't have to do with the fact that they meditate 10 minutes a day. Maybe it's the fact that there's less air pollution. Maybe it's not their diet. Maybe it's that they've got reasonable health care in their country. There are so many things that can explain why this one country might appear to have a better health outcome, or why people who use this one product. I can tell you right now that this is certainly true for the United States, and I'm going to assume the same thing happens anywhere. You will hear somebody say something along the lines of, this particular variation of food is healthier for you than other people who have this food have better health and live longer than people who have this other food. Well, it's usually a more expensive food and usually harder to get. And so it turns out that you're no longer comparing the effectiveness of the food, you're comparing the 2 groups. And what is there something that the rich people have that benefits them health-wise that the poor people don't have? Yeah. They probably live in places that are less polluted. They probably have better health care. They probably have better medicine. They probably have a lot of things going for them. Again, I can think of a situation where the medicine is actually, or the food is actually bad for them, but because they had enough of an advantage going into it, they still are better off overall. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is true in some situations. And so the question is, what produces the pattern that you find in the data? Again, your job is to do the detective work to say, why did we observe this particular outcome? And you want to be able to say, here were the 5 possibilities. We could rule this one out. We could rule this one out. This one was not likely. This one was interesting, but this one seemed most likely for the following reasons. And so I recommend we act on that particular theory. Again, that's where you bring the value. And that may require that you have data that was never part of the data set, that you know things about the groups, people who were involved in it, and how things were measured. That's why I said those questions are important. They will give you the contextual information you need to explain the patterns you find in the data. And then I'm going to finish with this last question. What can you do about it? Specifically, if you find a pattern in your data, your client is going to want to know, what do we do now? The phrase for that is actionable insights. And I have talked about that every time I've spoken with you, because I think it's one of the most important things you can do. The idea here is that you have found the patterns, you have gone through the process of trying to decide what caused that particular pattern. And once you have done that, if you know the nature of the pattern and what produced it, then you can make a recommendation to your client, because of what we saw in this data set, you should do this. Now, the trick here is you are making a cause and effect inference. And the reason that's tricky is all data is inherently correlational. There is no such thing as cause and effect data. It simply does not exist. It's philosophically impossible. Cause and effect is an inference that is based on the structure of the data. I know there's a thing called causal modeling, but it is still just correlations. But if you have data from an experiment, then you have a better basis for making a cause and effect inference. But it's always an inference. But you want to have a solid inference. And so you want to be able to rule out these bizarro reasons why there might be a correlation that has nothing to do with what your client is interested in. But if you can get to a cause and effect inference, then you can tell your client what they need to do and give them that actionable insight. And again, this is the sort of thing that you want to document in your portfolio. I was able to deliver this and this actionable insights. And then you wait a little while, hopefully you get some follow-up data, and that produced this improvement and this improvement. You know, I still think of this project I did about 10 years ago, where my best actionable insight was to tell this museum, you don't need to be open on Sundays. That's the people who come on Sundays are not there to see the collection. They're there for the concerts that are outside. You don't need to be there. You don't need to be open on Sundays anymore. And so I told them, you can close this one day. That is a very easy actionable insight. And it was very solidly based on the data. And that's where we brought the value. And that's the sort of thing that you can do, and you can document. You could say, we reduced their costs by 10% while maintaining the same level of attendance or profitability or whatever is relevant for your particular client. Taken together, all of these, what they communicate is that you are the person who can see meaning. The AI, the algorithm does not see meaning. It sees data, it sees correlations, but you can see meaning. And by seeing the meaning, you can add value to your clients. And that's the single most important thing that you can add to your portfolio. And with that, I am going to turn off my screen sharing and come back and see if you have any questions for me. All right. Oh, thank you. So we're back. That's good. Well, oh, thank you very much. Let's if you want to, you can put a question in the chat, and I can give you. We've got a few minutes, and I can give you some ideas. Again, the big picture things here. I want to say is yes, you need technical ability. You need to know how to work in your tool of choice. Now that we've gone through the AI revolution, I have decided to go all in on Python. I resisted that for many, many years. I did data analysis in SPSS and JASP and R. Those were my preferred tools, but AI is happiest with Python, and so now I'm working in Python. So you need to know how to do things there. But that's just, the gambling term, those are table stakes. That just gets you in the door. It's not sufficient to distinguish you. What you need after that is to show that you can get meaning and actionable insights for your client from the data. So that involves interpretation. And truthfully, I think one of the best places to get that is I'm a big fan of literature. I've talked about literature. I think understanding people is going to give you a great ability to build on your analyses, understanding people's motivations, their experiences. I think reading the news, I think seeing what's going on around people, with people around you. I mean, seriously, talking to your friends, talking to your family, watching your neighborhood and seeing the sorts of things that people are dealing with and seeing how well that can inform your ability to make sense of your data. You know, so much in the data world is oriented towards big tech companies. And they do hire a lot of people, and the data is important there. But as I've argued elsewhere, 99% of companies, actually 99.94% of companies in the United States are smaller, medium businesses. They're not giant companies, they're smaller ones. And so you can look at things, the pharmacy on the corner or the salon that does people's hair. They have questions that can be answered theoretically with data. You might want to see what sorts of questions they're interested in. The next time you're there, the next time you're picking up your medicine, the next time you're getting your hair done, the next time you're taking your dog for a walk, talk to the other people, ask them what sorts of things come up for them. That's going to help you put things into context in ways that make more sense. Now, I am not totally sure I am in. I'm in the chat. If you got a question, please put it in the chat, and I would be happy to try to answer that. All right. Okay, so Emmanuel wants to know, can you do A/B testing in R and in Python? Yes, absolutely. There are many, many ways. A/B testing is actually not difficult. Setting it up, meaning creating the two versions of the website, and then you're going to need usually like a plugin in the website to automate the gathering of the data. But A/B testing, the data analysis itself is pretty easy. In fact, often the plugin will be able to do the analysis for you. But you're going to want to talk to people too. So not just looking at conversion rates. You're going to want to talk to people too to see what the experience was like for them and whether they even noticed what it was like. And the funny thing about it too is A/B testing. So for instance, I buy things on Amazon.com. I never go to the landing page for Amazon.com because I have a search shortcut saved in my browser. So I always enter my search directly in there. And so if they're doing A/B testing on their front page, well, I'm never going to see it. And so that's a part of the information you would want to do. But yeah, A/B testing in R, Python, anything else, piece of cake. Any other questions? Emmanuel, you're welcome. I'll tell you right. Oh, here we go. So Mariama asks, As a beginner in the data field, how can you communicate the impact of your projects in your portfolio, given that most of the data we work on are dummies? Okay. You can use surrogate outcomes. It is possible to say that, yes, this is an artificial data set, but from this, I can predict that this would be the outcome. It is reasonable. If you can estimate the return on investment, the ROI, say we would expect a difference this big based on this much, how much is it going to cost for them? How much time is it going to take to implement the change that you're recommending? If you can even make a rough estimate to that, show that you know how to consider it, that you can include it as part of your recommendations. Well, when you work with real data with a client, they can give you the real values, and then you can use that. So I think it's fine to use the artificial data, but just show that you know how to take the analysis all the way through, including a return on investment analysis, again, the time and the money that's associated with it, and anticipated outcomes. That's going to be something that you can do. Also, if you can show that there's a more insightful way of looking at the data set, I can tell you right now, a lot of times people do an analysis, they get an answer, and then they stop there without asking what's behind that analysis. There's a data set that's well known called the UCB, or University of California at Berkeley admissions data set. And it's used as an example of a statistical peculiarity called Simpson's paradox about aggregated and disaggregated data. And most of the time, people use it and they say, look, the results, it's a paradox. And you want to go, no, it's not a paradox. It lets you know that you're not asking the right question, that you need to dig a little further. And there are other questions that got unaddressed by simply stopping it. Oh, it's interesting. It's a paradox. I know some people who coach students in analyses and they try to solve social issues, but it's really frustrating to me that it looks like a lot of their analyses to say we did a root cause analysis and we found that the root cause was racism. Racism is real, racism is huge, and racism has a lot of impact. But that's not the final cause. You're going to now have to turn around and say look, well, why is racism playing out in this particular context? How did it happen here? What were the things that caused it to the people to develop these attitudes, and what caused them to show those attitudes here? So that's going another level deeper. If you have the data for it, that's going to give you a richer data set and something you can respond to. Again, racism, huge issue, but you can go deeper than that to try to actually come up with something that your clients can act on. Because it's racism, you kind of go, oh well, that sucks. You want to be able to do something about that. Okay. Hadija, you've had your hand up. Thank you so much. What's your question?
Hi, Barton. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. So, I have a question around, as a data analyst, our job is more to deliver insights and solve business problems for our clients. But sometimes maybe our recommendations may not always pan out as we expect. And in case that happens, how do you handle it professionally in terms of communicating with the clients and also protecting your credibility? As someone who is a beginner in this field, I'm trying to just understand how will you approach this in case it happens. Thank
It
you.
always happens. Thank you. It's an important question, so thank you for asking that. And it always happens. Now, believe it or not, there are statistical anomalies that explain part of this. What you're going to find is if you compare self-selected groups, people who chose to go to this doctor versus people who chose to go to this doctor. When you have self-selected groups, you're going to find the biggest difference of all If you randomly assign people to conditions, you are going to find a smaller difference. And then when you make a recommendation on that and you stick it out in the real world, and now you have thousands or millions of people, you're going to find an even smaller difference. This always happens, which is why it's important to prepare for that. So where did your data come from? If it's self-selected groups, you know that it's going to exaggerate the effect. And you know that you cannot make a real world estimate based on self-selected groups. Hopefully you've got some kind of experimental data, but at the very least, if you have correlates. So if you've got, let's say you're looking at these two, let's go back to education, because that's a good one. People who went to the fancy private school versus people who went to the public school. And if you find differences between the two groups, there's a lot of things that explain those differences. And so what you want to do in an ideal world is, I'll tell you what I do, is I would build a blocked regression model. So let's say I'm trying to predict earnings 5 years after graduation. And I have people who went to a fancy private school and I have people who went to a public school. That is going to be one of my predictors. I'm going to do a 0-1 indicator variable for whether they went to public or private school. But I'm going to put in about 20 other predictors that have to do with their test scores going into college. I'm going to try to get something about their range of experience. I'm going to try to get something about, if it's at all possible, their socioeconomic status beforehand. I'm going to try, if I can, I would try to get something about their parents' income. I would try to get about the city or the neighborhood that they come from. I would try to get all these other things that can predict income, but are not the same as the expected difference between education between this school and this school. And you enter all of those things into the regression model first. And then you take what's left over from that and you enter in as a second block, then you enter the school. And so what's that doing is really doing what's called a partial correlation. It is removing the difference of all of those other variables from the model before it goes to the last one. And what you're going to find there is when you have that kind of partial correlation, it is going to be a much smaller difference. But that is going to be much closer to what the real world difference will be. And so one of the things you want to do is, first off, you want to try to remove these, they're called spurious correlations. You want to reduce the effect of these spurious correlations by either eliminating them by using an experiment or controlling for as many of them as you can in like a blocked regression model. The other thing you need to do is you need to show how much overlap there is between the groups. Because you know what? It's like I talked about with test scores. There are people who talk like all men have higher scores on math than all women, that all men are way over here and all women are way over there. That is so far from the truth. The scores are like this. Here's the men, here's the women. And if you can tell that those two things are different, you know, there is so much overlap. The same thing is true about, you know, I'm a teacher, and people talk about educational interventions all the time. They say, you need to provide these kinds of assignments and do these kinds of things in your class. And they say, because this is best practice, because research supports it. And I go, you show me the data. How much overlap was there? Because I'm willing to bet that there's still a lot of overlap. And I'm also willing to bet that there are things other than whether the people did this one particular thing in class or this thing. I'm going to bet there's other things that make a difference. You know, and I have to, when people show me this stuff, I say, look, that's great. Does that work in my class? I can tell you, when I teach statistics, I'm in the psychology department, but I'm teaching statistics. That's a totally different class than people who are teaching clinical interviewing. And the things that work best for a clinical interviewing class are not going to be the same things that work best for a statistics class. And there's going to be a lot of overlap, and there's going to be a lot of differences. And so by putting in that variability, saying, look, there's a lot of variability, and there's a lot of confounding variables. And so what you have to do is you have to put those things in, try to reduce their effect if you can, but you can say there is overlap, and there is a certain percentage chance that this group could be this much higher than this other group. And you can quantify that. You can say there's a 65% chance that there will be a difference of 5 points or greater. That you can do. But it also makes clear to the people that this is not a yes, no, win, lose choice, that there is variability in it. And I think that that's going to be the best thing. It is letting them know that it's never all or nothing, and that you are working on averages, that on average this will work out, but it's not going to work out in this one particular guaranteed situation. So hopefully they've got a lot of situations where they can test it out. So that's what I'm going to recommend. Mark Finley says, as a data analyst, I often start with a well-defined business question, but stakeholders frequently request additional analyses, metrics, or visualizations as the project progresses. Yes, they do. How do experienced analysts manage scope creep while still being responsive to stakeholder needs? Okay, this is where I learned something from my sister. My sister, Lisa Polson, is a communications consultant in Silicon Valley in California. She has a company called Posey Corp. And she taught me the importance of preparing multiple proposals for a client. Now, they say for X amount of money, I can do these 5 things. If you don't have that much money, I can do these 3 things. Usually you want to prepare 3 proposals. So there's the one that's obviously too big and too expensive, and there's the one that's obviously too small and too cheap, but then there's the one in the middle that you hope they take, but you're giving them a choice. But what it does is you get to, you make a commitment. You actually get a signed contract. This is what I'm going to do. And when they come back to you and say, we want to do these other things, it is possible to say, that's a really great idea. Now, that's outside of the scope of our existing contract. And if you would like to prepare an additional contract that includes that, I'm happy to do it. It's going to add time, it's going to take more money, and you're going to sign on to that. It's hard to do that. Again, you don't want to be, show me the money. I'm not going to talk to you unless you pay me. But there is a way to say, this is what we agreed to, this is what I'm able to do. And if you need these other things, yes, we can discuss an additional contract to do those. But being able to produce the original contract, saying, that gets us out of the scope of the one that we agreed to, that puts us in this other one. If you want that, we can do it, but this is what I've agreed to. And it's also say, that's a great question for next time. Just say, save that for next time. And when we work together again, we can absolutely roll that into the initial contract. And so it's a way of letting them know that you want to do your work for them, but you also want to be able to give them, you want to get the work done in a reasonable amount of time. And also you've got other things to do and you can't go sleepless or work for free. And so it's telling them, this is what I can do. And we agreed to this, and I'm happy to do that. And also we can do this either as a separate contract, or the next time we go around, we can do this other thing. And with that, I think our time is up. It's 12:59. Well, it's 12:59 here in the United States, in the Mountain Time Zone. But I know it's been an hour. And with that, the face of shock. With that, folks, and you're welcome, Mark Finley. And with that, I want to invite you to, if you want to, you can come on LinkedIn. You can connect with me. I'm easy to find, Barton Polson, right there. And I am scheduled to return to you in 3 more months. And so we will be able to talk more again at that point. And with that, folks, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you, and I will see you again. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Paulson. I mean, guys, let's hear it for Doctor. Let's hear it for Prof. Come on, we can do better. We can do better. You know how we do it, guys. Let's appreciate it so much.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so
I mean,
much.
yeah, let's do that. Like, because honestly, you give us a lot to think about within this waiting period. I believe that sometimes the things we do learn from here, we get to apply them for the next 3 months so that we meet you, we can get something new, right? So thank you so much for this opportunity to share this wisdom with us. And guys, I know we've learned a lot. But let me chip in something here quickly before we call it off quickly. So, I mean, through the presentation, we've heard a lot, we've learned a lot. We have come to a definite understanding that even though technical ability is very good, we also need to, I always call it the soft skill side of understanding data, you being able to master these things, right? And for this reason, again, I think I mentioned it the last time, Blossom Academy, in collaboration with Blossom Pro, we are actually rolling out a course that do take care of these things, that bridges the gap between data technicalities and being a strategic thinker on how to use data. So as an individual, if you're looking at building data strategy, talent strategy, um, organizational strategy, this program that we are rolling out sets out to help eliminate these gaps so that we are not just technically inclined, we are impacting the business on a very high level. Dr. Paulson, I think it would also be grateful to show you that there are new fellows on this page. We are actually starting. We have a whole data analytics cohort we are running. So some of these technical terms, as you were mentioning it, I could see some of them very, very happy, guys. Don't worry. They are actually appreciating it. And also, we just graduated a group of people that are also going to man the data science, especially when it comes to that Greek space that is code for food. So most of the things you were saying, I know they were kind of authenticating it because these are some of the things at Blossom Academy we are actually pushing out and all that. But for those that have actually jumping on this call for the first time, please, we're recommending this course to you. That is the Business Data Analytics course. It's an international certification course that we do offer. I mean, the next cohort we have is happening on the 29th of this month. That is June. We are actually running out the very first one. We kind of completed our very first cohort that will be ending somewhere in July. We will be ending our first cohort then, and people are kind of authenticating some of these things that Prof is actually educating us on. So again, if you don't want to just build mastery in technicalities, you want to build value, you want to impact business decisions, you want to be responsible for the let's say the direction the business would go in terms of productivity, competitiveness, and everything, you being a part of it, we are recommending this course to you quickly. You can reach us on reach any Blossom contact that you have. But if you do not have, you can just call this number 024 368 5225. You can reach us on this number. We would be on the standby to help build our capacity in this level to become elite data professionals. Thank you so much for joining, guys. Let's give Prof some fire emoji in the comment section. You know how we do it. Let's put it in the comment section, like fire emoji, like because today I have written a lot. I have written about, and I know you've also learned a lot. Thank you so much. Connie, I know you're on the call. Do you have anything to say or to share? I mean, Dr. Paulson is here. Anyway.
I think you have done justice to it. And Dr. Paulson, it's always a pleasure to have you. And from all of us at Blossom, we say thank you so much for your time and always pouring into us. Thank you and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you
Good
so much.
afternoon.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.